Good afternoon and welcome to another exciting episode of our Airspace webinar series. Today, it's all about UAS Facility Maps. My name is Langston Majette, Aeronautical Information Specialist within the Air Traffic Organization at the Federal Aviation Administration, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Today's webinar is divided into two components. First will be the presentation about UAS Facility Maps, including a demonstration on how to access them. And this will be followed by an opportunity to have your questions answered live. I'm joined by a team of FAA experts who are ready to answer your questions. You can submit your questions at any time during the webinar. If we're unable to answer your questions during today's webinar, don't worry. We'll be answering all of the questions received today and posting them to our website. In this webinar, you'll learn what a UAS facility map is, when and how to use them, and how to find them on the FAA Open Data Platform, otherwise known as the FAA ArcGIS site. So let's begin. Let's start out with the basic question. What is a UAS facility map? A UAS facility map or UASFM, is the name given to a series of maps that show the maximum altitudes around an airport facility where drone flight can be authorized. Typically, no further coordination is required with the air traffic control facility if you're requesting to operate at or below that maximum altitude. The maps show the airspace around airports in Class Bravo, Class Charlie, Class Delta, and Class Echo surface airspace, otherwise known as controlled airspace. Class Golf airspace is uncontrolled, and drone pilots are not required to receive an authorization to operate in those areas. All altitude values are assigned as above ground level. These values are assigned by air traffic control facilities in increments of 50 feet up to 400 feet above ground level, which is in accordance with the small UAS rule. Each grid cell has a dimension of 1 minute of latitude by 1 minute of longitude, and the data for each map is updated regularly and often changes to reflect safety mitigations in that area. The UAS facility map is not a substitute for an airspace authorization. It's designed to be used as a tool to help operators understand and identify where they can and cannot fly. Part 107 pilots who want to fly above the designated altitude value, but still below 400 feet, can apply for further coordination of their airspace authorization requests. This means that your request will be reviewed by the air traffic control facility at that specific location. It's up to the individual tower to approve or deny these types of operational requests. Further coordination is a workload permitting function from ATC. So if you do not hear back from the tower before 24 hours of your proposed operation start time, your authorization request will automatically be canceled. Part 107 operators can apply for further coordination through the drone zone or through the LAANC capability. It's important to note that UAS facility map values are absolute, and any operation above the UASFM values requires approval from the FAA. Let's talk about this in further detail. As part of the small UAS rule, section 107.51 is the regulation that generally restricts UAS to operations below 400 feet above ground level. In uncontrolled airspace, this regulation also permits drones to fly within a 400-foot radius of a structure up to 400 feet above that structure, regardless of altitude. This permission does not apply within controlled airspace. In controlled airspace, you're limited to the UAS facility map value. If you want to fly above that altitude value up to 400 feet, you must apply for an airspace authorization accordingly. You're not allowed to factor in the height of a structure and automatically add that to your authorization. For example, let's say you wanted to use a drone to inspect a building that has a height of 350 feet, and that building is within a 200-foot grid cell. You must apply for an airspace authorization to fly at 350 feet, and that will require further coordination with the air traffic control facility. So when do you use a UAS facility map? UAS facility maps can be used by drone pilots flying under the exception for recreational flyers, or those operating under Part 107 when requesting to fly within controlled airspace. There are two ways to apply for an airspace authorization: through Drone Zone or through the Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability, otherwise known as LAANC. Applications in the Drone Zone are processed manually. To be successful, an applicant should check the UAS Facility Map to ensure they're requesting to fly within the maximum permitted altitude. LAANC provides a near real-time authorization through a UAS service supplier. Data from the UAS Facility Maps is provided to the USS, and in near real time tells the user if they can fly in a specific area. UAS Facility Map data is readily available when using LAANC. All drone pilots, regardless of flying as a recreational flyer or operating under Part 107, should use UAS Facility Maps to understand what airspace they're flying in, irrespective of using Drone Zone or LAANC. UAS Facility Maps are available online and should be checked prior to each flight because the data is continuously updated. Now, I know you're probably sitting and asking, how can I access the maps? I'm so glad you asked. All of the maps and affiliated data are available from the FAA through the FAA's Open Data Platform, also known as the UAS Data Delivery System. This means that the data is available to everyone, including yourselves, other drone pilots, the general public, and the drone industry as well. I'll demo the site in a moment, but it's important to understand that the facility maps are available via an online map viewer. And that makes it very easy for you to readily identify where you can fly. And of course, all of the LAANC UAS service suppliers provide this very same data through their applications. We know that not everyone is familiar with Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. GIS is a type of software that allows us to process and visualize all sorts of data. So we're going to take a few minutes now to explore the FAA's ArcGIS site. Just give me a few seconds while I switch over to the presentation. There we go. So when you access the UAS Facility Maps, this is the page you're going to see when you come to the home page. We have a lot of information that can be useful in helping you form a safe and complete airspace authorization request. We have information about the website itself. We have a section on how to use the website. We have information on UAS airspace restriction. And we also have some links to some important NOTAMs, or notices to airmen. These links contain time-critical aeronautical information that's useful for all pilots. But we're interested in how to see the maps. If we scroll down the page, this is the area that you want to be in. This blue box right here that has the word open is where you go to access the maps. So let's click on that. When the map viewer loads, the default view is of the lower 48 United States. Even though this is the default view, it's important to know that we have data and UAS facility maps for areas such as Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Guam as well. The default data shows Air Route Traffic Control Center boundaries, UAS facility maps, and UAS flight restrictions. So let's focus on the upper left-hand portion of the screen here. And these are some of the navigation tools that you can use to customize your viewing experience. First, we have the plus and minus tools, and these are used to zoom in and out from the map. You can easily zoom to a specific location in which you may have some interest in flying. If you're zoomed in really close, if you want to go back to this view of the United States, you can click on this home button just below, and that'll take you back to this default view. Just below the home button, you'll see a crosshair, and that will zoom to your location. So if you're accessing the maps online via your smart device, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet, you can click that button and the map will zoom directly to your location. Next up, we have the base map gallery. This allows you to change the background of the UAS Facility Map online map viewer. You can choose from different backgrounds such as topographic maps, satellite imagery, and other types of street maps as well. There it is loading, and you can see that all of the options that you have to customize your view. The next button over is for your data layers. This controls the amount of data that gets populated on the UAS facility maps. As this loads, you can see you have the option to add or remove different data layers. You can take away or add airspace. You can show the UAS facility maps. You can also remove some of the Air Route Traffic Control Center airspace boundaries. Next up is the About tool. This gives you information about the website and how to use the website as well. So if there's ever anything you need to figure out, just click that About button, and the information on how to navigate this map will likely be within this section. If you find yourself frequently flying in a certain area, you can go ahead and create a bookmark. So instead of having to search for that area every time you load the map, you can quickly go to these frequent locations of yours under your bookmarks. And last but not least, you're able to draw on the map. This is very useful in helping visualize your operating area. You can draw on the map at any location that you wish to operate. Just above these tools, you'll see the search bar. This search bar allows you to type in a specific street address, or you can type in a popular place, and there's a database that will bring up those locations. So for example, let's zoom to Denver International Airport. I'm going to start to type this in. And you can see the Esri World geocoder starts to bring up the popular locations. So we're going to zoom to the Denver International Airport, shown here on the list. And there you can see the UAS facility maps for the areas associated with Denver International Airport's Class Bravo airspace. Just to the left of the airport, on the western side of the map, you can see these lakes. Let's take a closer zoom in to this lake area. There we have Derby Lake. I want to shift your focus to the lower left-hand portion of the screen. You'll see a readout that displays the geographic coordinates, meaning the latitude and longitude of my mouse cursor. This is very important information because in order to submit a successful airspace authorization request, you're required to provide the latitude and longitude of your operation. So as I move my mouse around, you can see that populating with the location of the mouse. Just to the left of that readout, you'll see a small crosshair. If we click that small crosshair right here, we can now drop a pin anywhere on the map. You can see I have a pin dropped right in the center of Derby Lake. So if I'm formulating my airspace authorization request to operate in this area, I can drop that pin and I now know the geographic coordinates of that specific location. If you click on any of the UAS facility map grid cells, you'll see attribute data. Attribute data is information about the data element that we're examining on the screen. The attribute data for the UAS facility maps contains a bunch of useful information to help you formulate a complete airspace authorization request. We can see the maximum allowable altitude. We can see the date at which the data was last updated. We can see the airport name. And importantly, we can see the class of airspace as well. This is all useful information to ensure you submit a complete airspace authorization request. UAS facility maps have been created for just about all airports in the United States having controlled airspace. I'd like to share a few helpful tips for safe operational planning for flights in controlled airspace. As of July 23rd, recreational flyers can use LAANC to request an authorization to operate in controlled airspace. Recreational flyers are limited to the UAS facility map values. For areas where LAANC is not available, recreational flyers can operate or fly at FAA-approved fixed flying sites. And these are indicated by blue circles on the UAS facility maps. Additionally, Drone Zone will be available for recreational flyers to use in the near future. The UAS facility maps are color-coded, and this easily helps you identify areas where LAANC is available. If the facility map is green, that means LAANC is available. If the facility map is red, that means LAANC is not available at that location, and you must submit an airspace authorization request through Drone Zone. UAS facility map grid cells are rectangular, while airspace boundaries are often irregular, sometimes having circular shapes. This often leads to overlaps. As seen in this image, you can see that the controlled airspace is represented by the shaded area. Along the perimeter, the facility map grid cells extend beyond the controlled airspace. The altitude values only apply to areas within the controlled airspace boundary. It's important to remember that the airspace boundary is the determining factor if you need an airspace authorization, not the grid cell boundary. And also you can see that blue circle in the image, that represents an FAA approved fixed flying site for recreational flyers. So if LAANC is not available in your area, look for those blue circles on the facility maps, and that indicates where you can go ahead and fly. Just before we start the live Q&A, which will feature a special guest, so stay tuned, I want to thank you for joining us today. I know it was a lot of information, but you'll be able to rewatch this episode and all of our previous webinar episodes on our official FAA YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/FAA News. And also we have a lot of additional resources available for you on our website, faa.gov/UAS. The FAA also has digital media channels where we send out regular updates. So if you haven't done so yet, sign up on our websites to receive regular updates via email. As a pilot, understanding my operating environment is key to maintaining the safety of my crew, other users of the airspace, people and property on the ground, and successfully completing my mission. Safety should always be our #1 priority. Remember, no matter how you fly, whether it's under Part 107 or under the exception for recreational flyers, if you want to fly in controlled airspace, you must obtain approval to operate. Sit tight. We'll be back in just a few seconds to start the live Q&A, where we're going to answer your questions on the air. All right, we're back, and I promise we have a special guest, FAA airspace guy. I'm sorry, FAA drone guy, Kevin Morris.
Hey, Langston, thanks for having me on. Yeah, definitely, right? We've got the FAA airspace guy and the FAA drone guy here in one setting to answer your questions. So I appreciate you having me on. This should be fun.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. Kevin is one of the smartest guys I know. He's a fellow pilot, just like myself. So I'm pretty sure between the two of us, we can get a lot of your questions answered today.
Let's give it a try.
Let's get started.
Yep.
First question. Oh, this is a good one. Will all airports join LAANC eventually? That's a great question. The FAA is continually working to expand the participation in LAANC, and we've currently expanded LAANC to include federal contract towers as well. We hope to have LAANC expanded to more federal contract towers in the near future, but there are some airspaces, such as those operated by the Department of Defense or the military, that may not join LAANC for security reasons. So for those, we'll still rely on the drone zone to manually process those applications. That was a great question.
Yeah, good question.
Let's see what we have here. Do I have to register my drone before I fly? I'm gonna leave that one with you, Kevin.
All right, my question. So probably is the answer I'm going to give here. Drone registration is required for any drone that's weighing more than 0.55 pounds. So whether you're flying that recreationally under the exception for limited recreational operations, or you're flying under Part 107, if your drone weighs more than 0.55 pounds, it does require registration with the FAA. And registration with us, Langston, is only $5, and it's valid for 3 years. It could be accessed via our Drone Zone web portal. So $5 for 3 years if your drone weighs more than 0.55 pounds, or 250 grams if you prefer the metric system.
Hey, that sounds good to me. And you mentioned Drone Zone, which is a perfect segue for our next question. You've mentioned Drone Zone a few times. Is there anything special I need to know when applying for an airspace authorization in areas where LAANC is not available? That's a great question. So for starters, where LAANC is not available, you must use Drone Zone. Before you submit your authorization request in Drone Zone, it's important that you check out the UAS Facility Maps online to make sure you're requesting to operate within the permitted altitudes. Great question. Thanks for submitting that. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one for you, Kevin. How can I become a drone pilot? What are the rules I need to follow, and where can I find the information?
All right, how much time do we have left here in our webinar today? Great question. I would recommend you start on our website at faa.gov/UAS. That's really a great starting point, your first step in flying drones, whether you're going to do that just recreationally or you're going to do it under Part 107, or maybe you're trying to start up a business. That's going to give you the most up-to-date information and certainly put you on the right path for where you want to be. So in terms of rules to follow, there's really a couple different sets of rules that we have today. One is if you're going to operate under Part 107, and certainly there's a list of rules under there that you need to follow, including obtaining a remote pilot certificate and things like that. And the other set of rules was just updated by Congress back in October, which they call the exception for limited recreational operations. And so if you're flying for purely recreational purposes, you have the option to operate under those rules, which are not going to require you to obtain a remote pilot certificate, and makes it a little bit easier just to go out and fly the drone. So depending on how you want to fly, there's a couple different rule sets you can follow. But again, faa.gov/UAS is the place you want to start.
All right, sounds good. And I tell you, you keep setting them up for me. So here's the next question. Is there a list of airports showing when they will receive LAANC? The direct answer is no. We don't have a schedule for when airports will receive LAANC. However, if you go to our website, faa.gov/UAS, we do maintain a list that shows all of the airports where LAANC is currently available. And of course, if you don't want to go to that website to look at the list, you can quickly look at the UAS Facility Maps and look for that red or green color to get a quick idea whether LAANC is available in that area or not. All right. So I'll take this next one as well. So if I understand correctly, if flying under the elevation in the UAS Facility Map grid square value, I do not need to file a request in LAANC. That is incorrect. Any operations in controlled airspace require an airspace authorization. You have two ways to apply for that airspace authorization, via Drone Zone or LAANC. Now, if you are requesting to fly at or below that altitude of the UAS Facility Map value, if you use LAANC, you can get a near real-time authorization. So any operations in controlled airspace, regardless if you're below, at, or above, you need to request an airspace authorization to fly in controlled airspace. That's a very good question. We get that one all the time, and I'm so glad you asked that.
And Langston, that's the same for Part 107 as recreational flyers now, right?
Absolutely. Okay. As of July 23rd, LAANC is available for recreational flyers to request an airspace authorization. But it's important to remember that recreational flyers are limited to the UAS Facility Map altitude values in LAANC. All right. Some really great questions coming in.
They are.
Let's see. If my local airport doesn't have LAANC, how do I get an okay to fly anywhere in the airspace? I understand that I can't call the tower anymore. I'm going to leave that one for you, Kevin.
Oh, I bet you would. All right. So some of the requirements have changed, and so I want to clarify that a little bit as we get into this question. But there used to be a requirement that recreational flyers had to notify the airport operator if they were flying within 5 miles of any airport. That's heliports or seaplane bases,
I remember.
things like that. Yep. That requirement has gone away. So now the requirement is that if you're flying in controlled airspace, you must have an airspace authorization, which Langston just talked about in this webinar and some of the previous ones, using the facility maps and getting that through LAANC or Drone Zone. But if the airport is not in LAANC, you'll need to use Drone Zone. We do not want you contacting the air traffic control tower directly, because Langston, as you know, they get busy up there. Those guys and girls sometimes barely have time to handle the traffic they're working, and to take that extra request, they just don't have the time. So please don't call the control towers, but work through LAANC, or when Drone Zone becomes available for recreational flyers in the near future, they can work through that as well.
I told you, this is a smart guy right here. That's why we have him here. So next question, I'll take this one. So are UAS facility maps the same as LAANC grids? This is a great question because there's a lot of confusion between the terms UAS Facility Maps, and some people often refer to them as LAANC maps. They're separate. LAANC is the system that uses UAS Facility Map data to provide you a near real-time authorization through our UAS service suppliers. The UAS Facility Maps, they're available via LAANC or through our website, and you can also use them when creating your airspace authorization request via Drone Zone. So the UAS Facility Maps is one of the data streams that supports LAANC. When you use LAANC, LAANC incorporates that UAS Facility Map data along with other various data streams to see if we can approve your airspace authorization request. So that term gets mixed up sometimes, but they're really separate. LAANC uses UAS Facility Maps to help approve your airspace authorization requests.
And Langston, as long as you're talking about LAANC and UAS Facility Maps, I got a question for you because I get asked this all the time.
There we go.
Is LAANC an app? Can I go to like an app store or Google Play or something? Can I download LAANC?
That's a great question. Let me try to break it down just a little bit. So LAANC is a capability where we exchange data between yourself, the drone operator, and the FAA. LAANC is available via applications that are provided by third-party companies known as our UAS service suppliers. So you can access LAANC through the applications that our industry partners have created. And you can check our website to see a list of all of the approved UAS service suppliers. So they create the applications that you use to access the capability. That information comes to the FAA, we approve your request, and you receive that approval from the FAA through our UAS service suppliers. Our companies have desktop applications, some have mobile applications that are both available on Android and iOS or Apple platforms. So LAANC is not an app in and of itself, but our UAS service suppliers, those are FAA approved companies, they provide the LAANC capability through applications.
And just one more. So if I heard you correctly, that airspace authorization that I'm getting via LAANC through a UAS service supplier, that's actually an FAA issued authorization?
Absolutely. It's an FAA approval, and you can verify it via a 9-digit authorization code that's received from the FAA when we approve your airspace authorization request. So the authorization is always from the FAA. If you're using LAANC, you're going to receive that through our third-party companies, also known as our UAS service suppliers. It's a good question, Kevin.
Yeah, hey, thanks.
So let's see what we have here. Can I get an authorization from LAANC through the Before You Fly app? Your turn.
All right. So as you may or may not know, our Before You Fly app was recently updated, and it was released just maybe a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday. The Before You Fly app is we partnered with industry, Kitty Hawk, to revamp the app and to make it more applicable to today's regulations. So if you hadn't had a chance to go take a look at the new Before You Fly app, I highly recommend going and looking at it now, because it does incorporate a lot of the new information, especially in the exception for limited recreational operations. It incorporates also a lot of airspace restrictions, like, for example, Part 93, which is a fancy way of saying areas around like Niagara Falls or the Grand Canyon, those types of special flight rules area are all in there as well. But Before You Fly app, the app itself does not provide authorizations through LAANC. As Langston, as you were pointing out, if you need a LAANC airspace authorization, you will need to go through one of our UAS service suppliers. So the Before You Fly app is great. It's a total redo, and I've tried it out a few times, and it really works well, but it will not give you an airspace authorization through LAANC.
Excellent. Thank you guys for sticking with us. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one. If my flight is inside controlled airspace and a grid cell value with the 200-foot AGL value, do I need to apply for an airspace authorization if I stay below 200 feet above ground level? The answer is yes. Any operations in controlled airspace, whether you're operating under Part 107 or under the exception for recreational flyers, requires an airspace authorization. All operations in controlled airspace require an airspace authorization. Let's see, here's a good one. How do we know if our USS, our UAS service supplier, has an accurate facility map? All of the UAS service suppliers receive their data directly from the FAA. They're required to check their maps every 24 hours, And that's how we ensure that the UAS service suppliers are always providing you with the latest information on the UAS facility maps. That was a good question. What's next? Got a lot of great questions coming in here. Oh, here's a good one for you, Kevin. How do we submit for authorization from ATC?
Oh, well, haven't you answered that for like the last, but I'll try to field that one. For airspace authorizations to operate in Class Bravo, Class Charlie, Class Delta, or Surface Class Echo designated for an airport, really controlled airspace, you're going to need an authorization from air traffic control. And right now there are two ways to do that. One is through LAANC, which we've talked about a little bit here today and what your previous webinar talked about. Yep. And the other is through Drone Zone, and that's our web portal. As you pointed out, Lanks, and I think it's preferable if folks try to use LAANC if it's available, because as Langston was saying, you're going to get a near real-time approval to operate in that airspace. Drone Zone is a web-based application, and that process takes a little bit longer. It's not going to be a near real-time authorization, correct?
That's correct.
Yep.
That's correct.
So if you're in an area that is not LAANC enabled yet, you're going to need to use Drone Zone, and that will take just a little bit longer than applying through the LAANC. So a little bit of preparing and planning ahead, but that's where you're going to get your authorizations from to operate in controlled airspace. A good question.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so here's a good one. Does the online GIS facility map show all controlled airspace, or do we still need to check sectional maps? That's a great question. Our open data platform shows all of the controlled airspace that surrounds an airport where you will need an airspace authorization to operate. An easy way to find out whether you need an airspace authorization or not is checking to see if a grid map is there. For all of the areas where you need an airspace authorization, you're going to see a grid map there. Checking the sectional charts is very helpful for improved situational awareness, but if you want to see if you need an airspace authorization or not, you can look at our online map viewer, and if you see grid cells there, you're going to need an airspace authorization to operate in that surface area of the controlled airspace, which is typically going to be closer into the airport, and that'll be covered by the facility map grid cells. Here's another one. Using Drone Zone, how long does it take to get an approval to fly? So that's a great question, and we've been seeing a lot of improvements in the processing time for authorization requests received via Drone Zone. With LAANC available, a lot of people are leaving Drone Zone and using the LAANC capability to get a near real-time authorization. So what that does is it shortens down the queue or the line or the backlog for folks waiting to receive an authorization within Drone Zone. However, I can't give you an exact time because it's really workload dependent, and the authorizations via Drone Zone are processed regionally. There's a Western service area, a Central service area, and an Eastern service area. So depending on the volume of requests received at any given time, that's really going to dictate how long it takes for you to receive an authorization. But I've been checking with our service areas, and we've been seeing processing times in the matter of days, sometimes a week, and that's an improvement from what we once advertised as the 90-day process.
Yes, I remember that. Probably most of our attendees remember that, maybe not fondly, but they certainly remember those days. It was painful for sure. Yeah.
But things are continually to get better as LAANC becomes more available for people to use. Here's one for you, Kevin. Does Class E airspace require an authorization?
Oh, all right. We're short on time, and no. So the short answer is not really, but hang on. There are different types of Class E or Class Echo airspace, and it really depends on where you're flying. So as a general rule, if you're flying in Class E airspace that extends down to the surface and is surrounding an airport, we kind of reference that as Echo 2 airspace, and we are going to then require an airspace authorization. If you're flying in Class E airspace, for example, under Part 107, we know that you can fly, a lot of people refer to as the tower inspection part of the rule, where if you're within a 400-foot radius of a structure, you can go to the top of that structure plus another 400 feet. Sometimes that can put you into Class Echo airspace. Now that's not surface Class Echo, and it's not associated with an airport, and in those cases you do not need an airspace authorization. But I'm going to kind of go back to what you said earlier, because I think that's the key point, is if you're wondering whether or not you're going to need an airspace authorization to operate in a particular area, take a look at the UAS Facility Map. As Langston mentioned earlier, if there is a grid associated with the area you'd like to fly in, you're going to need an airspace authorization. And that's probably the simplest way to state whether or not you need an airspace authorization in Class E airspace. Otherwise, you can take a look at some of our playlists on YouTube. I know I've done an entire webinar dedicated to Class Echo airspace. You can watch that. You know, really will explain everything I just tried to summarize in much more detail. So great question. Thank you.
Absolutely. Check out our YouTube channel. So we have time for one last question. Time flies when you're having fun.
It does, man. It does.
Is the UAS Facility Map ArcGIS site also operable on smartphone or mobile device, or is there an app version? There is not an app version, but you can access the online map viewer via your mobile device or smartphone or tablet or what have you. That's a great question. So I want to thank you guys for joining us today. They were really great questions. I want to thank you, Kevin, for helping me out, field some of these great questions with your expertise. And we hope to see you guys next time. Remember, fly safe. It's all of our responsibility. Thank you. Have a great day.